they downplay how successful he was because it seems like he's like a far off candidate. But I just knew he was the first black person. It was anti-Reagan. That was the platform.
In the annals of time, riding social forces as they crest and crash onto the shores of history, some would-be heroes stumble but manage to recover their breath. Others are reduced to the flotsam and jetsam of nostalgia. These others are our subjects. They are the vanquished, 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 vanquished.
Hello and welcome to The Vanquished. Anders Lee here with my co-host Freddie G.
So happy to be
in Freddie G's home as well, first. And we're joined by guest, Meka, comedian. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Indeed, yeah. Good to be out here in Queens. And this is a special episode because this is probably my favorite topic we've covered so far. This is candidate I find very interesting, Jesse Jackson. Why don't we start? What were your guys' first exposures or time hearing about Jesse Jackson, if you remember it, or how he like kind of came about in your?
It is weird as a Jewish kid. My dad was like, he said this thing, Himey town. He's no good. He doesn't like us, and that's all I heard at that point.
I'm black, so Jesse Jackson was a hero in my home. What, did he do something anti-Jewish? I don't remember that.
We'll get to it. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pro Jesse, but he did do something a little anti-Jewish.
Oh, anyway, I'm black, millennial, so I always knew Jesse. Yeah, he's a prominent figure in the household Rainbow Coalition. Yes.
Yeah, I had known about him a little bit, kind of vaguely as a kid, but the thing that really made me curious to learn more is I remember hearing my great uncle, who was an electrician in Iowa, and was missing his index finger because he worked during the New Deal. He like laid down some power lines and it zapped off his finger accidentally. But he was a Jesse Jackson supporter in the 80s, and I remember being like kind of surprised by that. I was like, what was this phenomenon, this candidacy? And it's like kind of been sort of brushed under the rug in a lot of ways in American politics.
True. It's so weird. Yeah, we don't talk about Jesse Jackson anymore. I feel like something happened and like we didn't like him anymore. I can't remember exactly, but Jesse Jackson was the first. Was he the first black man to run for president or something like that?
I know he was the second black person to run in a Democratic primary, but
Yeah.
I don't know if.
So there's Shirley Chisholm.
Shirley Chisholm, first black woman.
Yeah, first black person to run. And then there Eldridge Cleaver, which I haven't researched, there's some level of him running, but Jesse is often considered the first black man in the Democratic primary.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And also in 88, he gets close.
Right.
I thought it was like a side campaign or whatever. He's actually the number 2 person in the 88 primary.
No. Well, I wasn't. I don't know. I wasn't around. That's the thing. Yeah, they downplay how successful he was because it seems like he's like a far off candidate. But I just knew he was the first black person. It was anti-Reagan. That was the platform.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is good because Reagan sucked. He ruined the country. And I'm screwed.
Right, definitely the closest someone got before Obama. But he was originally from South Carolina, and we'll go more into his like bio stuff in the other half. But I know he was a quarterback growing up, and he was like benched. They didn't want to let him play quarterback. He says it's because of his race. Although the team did have another black quarterback at the time, but really
he transfers to another school.
Yeah.
I didn't know they had a black quarterback. Someone else was a black quarterback though.
Yeah,
I didn't know he played sports.
he did growing up. Yeah, and he played QB, and he talks about it sometimes. And in a way, being the president is kind of the quarterback of America, so it would make sense that he would run.
Wow, what an analogy.
But of course, he's very involved in the civil rights movement.
Yes.
I know, Fred, you were digging up stuff about his relationship with Dr. King.
Yeah, he was working in Dr. King's movement. He did Operation Breadbasket. They would basically boycott businesses that sold to black people but didn't hire black people.
Oh, that's smart. I like that.
Yeah.
We should do that now. Was he down with Al Sharpton? Was that him?
He's Al Sharpton credits him as a mentor.
Yes, that's what it was. I knew there was some black civil rights connection with them.
Yeah.
And then Sharpton runs a Jesse Jackson style campaign in 2004.
Right.
He did?
Yeah.
Yeah. The primaries.
Yeah, when you watch the 2004 debates, as only dorks like us have, he's the one guy saying anything good because it's mostly just crap and like, oh, I'll fight the Iraq war harder than Bush.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. But he was present, I believe, when King was assassinated and kept the sweater on that he had worn and it had blood stains on it. So he wore that sweater for, I think, a few weeks after that.
Dr. King killed by the CIA.
Yeah. As we did, by the time you're watching this on YouTube, maybe the documents will be revealed.
I thought it was the FBI.
Probably the FBI. But,
Maybe it's
maybe
one
it's
of
both.
them.
Maybe
Somebody
it's both.
white.
Might have been a collab, yeah. Oh, definitely, yeah.
But in 1983, very significant time because, Reagan's been in office, the Democratic Party kind of in retreat, and there's a call for more black candidates for mayor around the country. You've Maynard Jackson in Atlanta around this time, and Chicago, they're thinking about running somebody to the left of the Daley Machine and Jane Byrne. And Jesse thinks about it, but Harold Washington ends up being the guy. But there is a lot of tension between Harold Washington and Jesse Jackson.
Who was Harold Washington?
He was the first black mayor of Chicago who was progressive congressman who was mayor during the 80s and was planned on being mayor for like 20 years and was remaking urban politics in Chicago because it had been dominated by the Democratic machine. Is very corrupt and anti-black, very racist, and there was this new sort of momentum forming behind kind of a new way of governing Chicago, and then unfortunately he died, and it kind of went back.
He died?
Yeah, he died in 87.
So how long was he mayor?
For about 4 years.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Not long.
I think it was
figure out.
5 years. He got reelected, and then
I think it might, is it two-year? It might be two 2-year terms. I'm trying to think about, yeah.
it was like 1 4-year, and then like 1 year
and then he just
after
died.
he got
That's so
reelected, and
sad.
got died. Yeah, but he was elected in 83. And there's some weird tension between them because Jesse is, and this comes out a lot in the book Fire on the Prairie, which I read a while ago about Harold Washington. Mm-hmm. There are some civil rights activists who kind of accuse Jesse Jackson of like taking credit for other people's work.
Yeah, something like that. I remember
Yeah.
black people being mad at him about something, but it was like my mama's business. But like, yeah, people do not like, Jesse Jackson's a controversial figure technically in the black community.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I know during, I think it was 2014 in Ferguson, he was kind of like chased out of town because people would accuse him of showing up and self-aggrandizing.
Yeah, ambulance chaser, they call them.
Yeah.
Yes. But I will say him and Sharpton, they get the media there every time.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I don't know why, like, you can't be hating when you got media with you.
Right. I think, that's kind of what Fred and I were talking about earlier. Is like there's good and bad in Jackson. There's fair criticisms, but ultimately it's like a good thing that he was running for president.
Yeah, let me just read this quote from
Sure.
that book. Yeah, he didn't nurture a project through infancy and adolescence. Instead, he intruded on other people's plans once they had matured. So that's kind of the criticism of Jesse.
Yeah.
We're going to get to a lot of the good stuff he did in the campaigns, but yeah, it is good to have the other side.
Right. And there is a really funny moment, though, in that 1983 race where he and Washington are on stage together. And there's one moment where Jackson like takes his hand and clasps it like in a victory formation during one of the rallies. And Washington is like clearly kind of taken aback by it. And then on election night, he does the same thing. And Washington is like pulling his hand away from him. Eventually, he does endorse Jackson's campaign for president, but he's like not a fan personally. So 1984, Ronald Reagan is president and running for a second term. He's unseated Jimmy Carter, of course, and the economy's pretty bad. Recession going on till 1983, And we don't know this yet, but the economy is going to like get better.
Wait, why was the economy bad in '84? Sorry, off topic. I don't know.
Reaganomics. Ultimately Paul Volckeronomics, because the Fed chair lowered interest rates under Carter and kept them there, and then he was kind of pressured into raising them, and that made the economy contract. And then Reagan's also, deregulate everything.
Deregulate, cutting back on everything that impacts us now.
Yeah.
So Carter was like, I don't care if there's a recession, just fuck the economy up. And he fucked the economy up, and then he lost the election, and then it was bad during most of Reagan's first term.
Wait, so why did Carter do that?
Ideology, I guess. He was, a prude in a sense in all things.
He just wanted to get
He was economically conservative, and he didn't like inflation. He didn't really care about working people, but his dad owned a peanut farm.
Got it. That makes sense. Anyway, okay, go on. And then Reaganomics, cutbacks. Oh, that probably gave Reagan power to do a lot of the cuts.
Yeah. Yeah, the economy is really bad, and so it's like getting worse, and he comes in and is like, I'm going to just make it better, but in
he's
reality...
like, welfare queen.
Right. Demonizing people. But so why does Jesse Jackson run for president in 1984? Fred, can you kind of set the stage for this candidacy and how it comes about?
I mean, things are really conservative, and no black candidates really run or done much. And they're like, the Democratic Party is basically just neglecting us. They're treating us like the Harlem Globetrotters. We're not on the real team, but we get to show off. And let's have a black candidate run, and then eventually they try to find somebody else, maybe, but then eventually becomes Jesse.
Got it. Oh, why did they try to find somebody else?
They looked, either he didn't want to be seen as wanting power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or they're like, well, we have black mayors. Why don't we? They're the highest black elected officials. Let one of them run. But none of them wanted to run. Because Jesse's not an elected official. He's a reverend and a leader.
Yeah, that's true. He's a civil rights leader, essentially.
Right. So he really had nothing to lose by running.
Yeah, that's true. That is true, yeah.
What was, and they would, a lot of people who supported this campaign would say now in retrospect, even of the 1984 campaign, that this one, not 1988, but 1984 was really a protest campaign. They didn't like the direction of the Democratic Party. You had Mondale was a foregone conclusion that he was going to get the nomination, and his main competition is Gary Hart, but they're both kind of moving in a new direction, which will kind of culminate in Bill Clinton. But they're both sort of economically conservative, even though Mondale has a past of being like an LBJ Democrat. Now he's like kind of like, all right, fine, we got to run on austerity, and we are going to raise taxes, but it's to pay off the national debt. And there's go ahead.
Oh yeah, Reagan had raised the national debt because he increased defense spending and cut taxes. So they're like, the New Deal's over. We're not doing all these programs. We're cool now. We're the Atari Democrats.
Got it.
And that's what they call themselves.
The Atari Democrat. Wait, why did Reagan raise defense? Was there a war in the 80s? No, right?
Cold War against the Soviets.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And
we lost that. No,
Also, it's just a huge giveaway to the rich because of defense contractors and everything.
No, that makes sense.
Right.
Okay, it kind of starts that whole defense contracting thing.
Yeah. But we read Ryan Grimm's book about this, We Got People, which talks a lot about Jesse Jackson's campaigns. But at this point, there's sort of four main groups, you were saying, Fred, that like make up the Democratic primary electorate. There's African Americans, Latinos, feminists, and other left-leaning activists are kind of bunched together as one sort of interest group, as Gary Hart would sort of call everybody who wasn't a Gary Hart supporter. Like, these are interest groups.
Yeah, they're the actual left. Yeah, and
Right.
and Ryan Grimm's book is great. He's a political reporter. If you haven't heard of him, and he connects Jesse Jackson, people like Howard Dean, and to people like AOC. So he connects all the different left movements.
Oh,
in his book.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then you also have, the old New Deal coalition, liberal centrists, and American Jews. And then there's also
Unions are big with that. Yeah.
unions as well.
Yeah,
right.
it's big with the unions. And then, Mondale used to be like a union guy, but then he kind of runs not so much like that. He runs as more of a conservative with the economics.
Right, 'cause
And
he's-
nobody likes that.
You're right, because he's just been Carter's vice president and sort of like been brainwashed almost to like all this stuff he used to believe is like, and you can tell he like hates it, but he's accepted that this is the way the Democratic Party has to be for whatever reason. And then you have the yuppies. You have this new cohort of young professionals who are upwardly mobile, very pro-environment, but anti-labor. John Anderson kind of represented this. And then there's another one, conservative Democrats, which is still a thing in the 80s. I mean, that's Clinton, conservative governor from the South. That's like part of the Democratic Party. You have in 84, Dianne Feinstein, because the convention was in San Francisco, she was okay with like a Confederate flag there because she's like, well, we got all these Southern delegates.
Oh yeah, there were still a few conservative Democrats.
Yeah.
Back in the day. That makes sense.
Yeah. So they get Jesse to run, but his candidacy doesn't start until pretty late in the cycle.
It's November of '83. So
Right.
although the other candidates are already in at that point, and it is that the idea is that he's kind of drafted. People are saying, "Run, Jesse, run."
Yeah. One of the goals with his candidacy is to have a black candidate in the primary to show that they belong, they can't be ignored by the establishment. And he's running against apartheid in South Africa.
Oh yeah, I remember that. No, I was joking.
I remember hearing about it, but it was pretty much over by the time.
Someone did say in the
Elon
Chicago
Musk thing.
in the Chicago mayor's race, they were like, "Don't talk about apartheid over there. We got apartheid over here."
Right.
That's true though.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were still against apartheid, but they were like, you should, like our schools are pretty segregated here today.
Yeah, that's true. My mom marched against apartheid in the 80s.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
But one thing that Jackson says is that our nation needs a new direction, not just a new president. A couple of his slogans: "I am somebody," which is the title of a biography of him, and "Keep hope alive." And it's very much an outsider campaign. Even established Democrats who are black don't support him. Like a lot of these mayors, he can't get. They
Keep
endorse
hope
him.
alive. Wait, I remember that. Where's that from?
That's a Jesse
from Jesse.
slogan.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
He's still in the lexicon.
Well, he says that at one of his convention speeches too, right? I think in.
Yeah, I think it's like a famous thing.
Yeah. So Washington, who we mentioned earlier, Harold Washington in Chicago, he gives him a preference in 1984, not a full endorsement because there's still personal tension there. And Mondale, again, has union support, but Jackson has, so Mondale's big labor, but Jackson says, we have big church. So he's able to make the rounds.
Big church.
Yeah.
But like black church, not crazy white people church.
I assume so. I mean, he
Yeah.
probably went to one or two.
Yeah, it is
white
more.
churches.
I think it's black churches in the South, and they register a lot of voters,
Yeah.
and they actually
Yeah.
help the Democratic Party out a lot.
Right. And that's the thing that's kind of crazy how he's kept at arm's length by the Democratic establishment, but he's helping them register people because in 1980, a lot of these states, it was a landslide election. You look at the election maps, like, wow, Reagan really cleaned Carter's clock, but a lot of these states were pretty close, and they just had all these people who were not registered who would have voted Democrat. And if you had just gotten some of them to vote, then Reagan never would have been president. There's a famous speech Jesse Jackson gives where it's kind of the David and Goliath story, and all these unregistered voters are rocks that are laying around, and we have to pick them up and throw them at the Gipper. But it helps them take Congress back in 1986 after 84. Jackson gets some credit, but there is also NAACP is registering people too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not 100% him.
But they're all in it together, right?
Yeah.
NAACP, the Rainbow Coalition. I don't know what the Rainbow Coalition is.
It's his org. So yeah, these are different
that's
orgs. They
his
might have
org.
rivalries.
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
Right, which is, I think a key theme here is what is the Rainbow Coalition? That because it's something that had a lot of potential and came out of these campaigns, but as we'll get to, didn't, unfortunately, did not sustain as a political movement into the 1990s.
Yeah, there is an incredible quote about when he's registering voters. Someone says, if he had come here 20 years earlier, he's in the South at this point, they would have probably hung him. So
Yeah.
it is.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, so it is. Yeah, there's something incredible about this.
It is a pretty big deal to have a black candidate running in the Democratic primary in southern states just 20 years after the Dixiecrats ran the show in these places.
That's true. That's a lot of progress.
Yeah. But his platform, he's running on free healthcare, childcare, acceptance of gays, a living wage.
Really?
Yep, and he wants tuition-free community college. And on Israel-Palestine, he is for a two-state solution, which in 1984 is a fairly radical.
Oh, really? It's radical. And what was the standard in 1984?
It was like, oh, these people are refugees. We gotta. It's kind of unfortunately what it's become now. It's like these people are refugees. We gotta house them somewhere, but they don't have their own state.
So the two-state solution was radical at that. It's radical now, it seems. It went back.
So this is from 88, and Al Gore in a debate, he runs in 88, says it would be like a knife aimed at the heart of Israel. That's what he says about that's what he says about Palestinian state. So like that's kind of how it's more viewed. Then some other candidates are like, well, if Israel's okay with a Palestinian state, then we're okay with it. That was the moderate position.
Oh, interesting. That's really interesting.
But yeah, Jesse's ahead of his time. He's for civil unions for gays, which is way ahead of his time.
That's crazy. And he's a black preacher from the South?
Yeah.
Random.
He's willing to align with other people, yeah.
Right, but he's kind of taking these, and again, they're dismissed as interest groups, but he's taking people and communities that have been dismissed by the Democratic establishment and saying, we are in this fight together, let's form a coalition.
It's the modern day coalition, if you think about it. Like gays,
right, and it's
blacks.
Yeah, and it's the coalition that Democrats relied on in going into 90s, early 20s.
Were the Jews mad about the two-state solution, though? Like, when that was first?
Yeah, he's not great with getting the Jewish vote. Now, Jewish leftists, he's good with.
Yeah.
Jewish leftists is maybe like 10% of Jews.
That makes sense.
The rest of Jews, he has some issues with, and that does become, he has a New York primary later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like basically, in 1964, this guy, Barry Goldwater, ran, and he got his ass kicked. But that built the Reagan coalition for the 80s. And then in 1984, Jackson ran, and he didn't do that well, but he helped build the coalition, then became the Clinton and the Obama coalition.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. There is a good quote from 84. He tells farmers in Iowa that they grow the corn and a black kid in Chicago eats the cornflakes, and neither could do it without the other.
That's true.
Yeah. It feels like an important sentiment.
You got to unite the urban and the rural workers. That's been always a big challenge. We did a guy, William Jennings Bryan, who the rural people loved and the urban workers didn't like.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, like, that's where Trump won. He, like, took away all those rural workers to the right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for Bryan, it is tricky because he's kind of in a coalition with the Klan. So it is tricky, yeah.
Well.
In the 84 debates in the primaries, Jesse has some good moments. He prioritizes, he says, peace, justice, and education in that order. And there's a debate after he wins the South Carolina primary where a moderator asks, you have to concede that you'd be a really good dark horse if you won. And Jackson says, I'm a dark horse no matter what.
That's true. Wait, he won the primary? That's pretty big.
Yeah, he wins some
South
primaries.
Carolina?
Yep, South Carolina, Louisiana, D.C., Virginia, and there's two separate contests in Mississippi.
That's like, those are big primaries to win.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal, especially in just 20 years.
No one ever talks about it.
Yeah, in 84, I think he finishes like a solid third in like the delegates.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah. And then in 88, he's second, yeah. Yeah, that's why people act like it was like a sideshow, like he wasn't winning. Yeah, he won a bunch of states.
That's crazy.
Right. But here's where we the thing we talked about earlier about him being accused of anti-Semitism comes in because there's a interview he gives to a journalist who I believe is black, where he's talking about New York and refers to it as Himey Town, which understandably is seen as little insensitive.
What does that mean?
See,
Well,
it's
that's
weird.
the thing. It's like not. It's become a slur kind of because of this. But before he said that, no one had ever used Himey as. I had a friend named Nierheim. His last name was Nierheim, and I called him Himey. I don't know if I was calling him a slur, but you were saying that that's not actually.
Yeah, it became this thing where like, oh, he said Himey Town and Himey's a slur, and then it's like, well, when else was Himey a slur? And it's like, oh no, it's a bit circular. I think he just knew Jews in Chicago named Hyman, and he would have to negotiate with them or whatever. It is kind of like saying like there's Jews who own businesses that are tough to negotiate with. He is kind of implying that. But Himey being a slur, there's not much evidence for.
Okay, I'd never even heard of it before.
Yeah.
And when he says Jews that do business, he's talking about the Hasids? Is that a slur?
Hasids, not so that's what they call themselves.
Yeah, that's what they. I'm like, wait, we don't know what to
He
say.
may be referring to more. Yeah, he may be referring to people like the Hasids.
The Orthodox people are always hard to do business with.
I think he's just saying there's a lot of Jewish people in New York, and he has trouble with Jewish voters.
Yeah. Also, Jews who are not left leaning are willing to be a little bit racist. My grandparents had some racism in them.
Yeah,
There's
that's
again, affirmative action did not help Jews. Jews might look down on it, like that. Yeah, there's issues between blacks and Jews, and this helped become a good galvanizing force. Also, he is the most pro-Palestine candidate in the race. He had met with Arafat. So it's perfectly set up for Jewish groups to be against him.
Got it. That makes sense. And they're kind of like the backbone of the Democratic Party, technically.
Yeah, and then he does do a thing where he is aligned with Louis Farrakhan. Have you heard?
Oh, yeah, Louis Farrakhan.
And Farrakhan does seem to be
anti-Semitic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the premise. And then he doesn't immediately disown Farrakhan, and that's ammunition also.
But Farrakhan is a part of the civil rights, coalition. So it's weird. In the black community, Farrakhan's very important. So that's another thing. But then, it's weird because, African Americans, older African Americans, are pro-Israel, technically. A lot of them are Christian Zionists. So, I don't know, but Farrakhan's also really important. So it's just, weird thing.
Yeah, complicated figure. But, yeah, definitely.
Oh, wait.
All right, there we go.
Okay.
Yeah, complicated figure, but somebody who clearly is anti-Semitic, and Jesse Jackson does have a hard time kind of disowning him, which his biographer says is well, that means he's a loyal guy, and it's a good thing. But
He's Farrakhan. He was important to the civil rights movement. So you can't in the black community. You're not going to be disloyal to Farrakhan because he's anti. I don't know. To Semitic to Jewish. It doesn't make any sense. If that makes any sense, I can't explain it, but.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. One other excuse is or a reason is he's in Cuba dealing with Castro and something with hostages or something. At the time, the Farrakhan said some stuff, and it's a little bit tricky. You're off in Cuba doing stuff.
Got it. So you know what Farrakhan's talking about.
But another thing with the Himey 10 is eventually Jesse says this was a colloquialism, not a slur, and it is fair. I think that is a fair argument.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, maybe not the wisest one to throw around. But he also, it just takes him a long time to get to the apology again, because he's not a polished politician who's thinking everything out, how the optics are, and is running at this point a protest candidacy. So he waits longer than another politician would, and that does kind of hurt him.
I think it's interesting usually when you have a black candidate, there is this anti-Jewish sentiment, the Jews get a little anti-black. I don't know what it's about, but it happened with Obama, and it happened with Kamala, I guess. I don't know.
I think some, I try not to look at people as, as indicative of everybody in there.
No, with Obama, I think the Zionists, I think so. I don't know if non-Zionist Jews had an issue with Obama.
I'm sure some did and some didn't.
Yeah. I know that Israelis do not like Obama.
No, they do not like it.
So and then people who support Israelis who are more towards Zionism and more conservative would not.
Yeah.
But in 1984, he gets 18.1% of the vote. This is a 8-person race, and there's the book Thunder in America about this notes that this initial campaign does have trouble appealing to non-black voters. But there's 25% of black voters who vote for him in 1984 and have never voted before this. So,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's bringing people into the political process. But Mondale, of course, gets the nomination, and Jackson is considered for the vice presidency, to have the nomination anyway. And he's interviewed by. That's more so 88, but 84 a little bit. He's considered.
So he did a nice thing. He's women, that's half our voters or whatever. Why don't you put a woman on the ticket? And that actually does help get Ferrara on the ticket.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There was a woman on the ticket?
Yeah, Geraldine Ferrara. Yeah.
Oh.
From Queens, actually.
Really?
Yeah. I think she had some scandals with money stuff, and for whatever reason, so Mondale is going to lose 49 states.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's crazy. And also, if you look at it now, Walter Mondale, who is that? But Jesse Jackson is
It is funny that
a household name.
The first episode of this podcast was about Walter Mondale.
Okay, got it.
Now, what do you think when you hear the name Fritz? He went by Fritz. Does that sound too German to you?
No, it sounds like some dude from like Brooklyn.
Fritz.
Interesting,
Okay.
Fritz. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, Ferraro. Yeah, her husband is mobbed up. And that
That
doesn't
sounds like a
help
mob
things.
ass name, Ferraro, right? And she's from Queens. It makes sense.
Yeah.
That's no good. No.
But Jesse is like, the government is going to do more for you. We're going to help you. And Mondale's like, no, we're just going to we're going to raise taxes and not do more for you. And that is not popular.
Wait, why is he saying that?
As he doesn't want to be associated with like tax and spend liberalism, so instead he's just tax liberalism without the spending.
Oh, that's kind of boring.
Yeah, and he's still has that Carter thing of like this real concern about inflation.
Why are they so concerned about inflation?
I mean, it was a problem at that point, but there are better ways to fix it than just not spending on people's needs.
The people who own a lot of stuff and own a lot of debt don't like inflation. It makes the debt worse. Yeah,
Right.
It's a good thing for rich people.
Yeah.
I get it.
So you mentioned Goldwater earlier, Fred. Some people think maybe the Jesse 84 campaign is the Goldwater 64 campaign of the Democratic Party. What do you?
Yeah. What do you? Yeah. Yeah. I think it is. Yeah. What do you think, Anders? Do you agree with me? You're a little more of a Goldwater expert, I think.
I mean, I don't think they adopt the stuff he's talking about in 84 for the most part. There's some social issues that eventually do come to the fore. But in terms of like the base and the coalition, I think that there's maybe something to that he is bringing in more people who are going to vote Democrat, and that does help them, the party going forward.
Yeah, that is the thing. He gets a lot of voters. They take back the Senate and the Congress in 86, but he doesn't necessarily get the policies, which is very disappointing.
Yeah. But between the campaigns, there is this organization. He's formed the Rainbow Coalition, and there are actions. There are plant closings that they show up at and protest.
Yeah, the Rainbow Coalition. They're famous.
He gives a speech after Harold Washington dies, and he says it's time to revive the war on poverty, and that LBJ had a vision of cities, Nixon had one of suburbs, Reagan of the ranch and outer space.
Why are Republicans so obsessed with outer space?
It's Mars was promised to me as during the Bush administration, and that never happened, unfortunately. And he also says we must stop drugs from going into America and stop drugs from coming out. And you think there's a little bit of Trumpism in here too?
Yeah, there is a thing of him blaming the other countries for the drugs.
Yeah.
But what were the drugs that we were sending out? I'm confused. We make drugs, or we did?
He's very much against all the crack that's coming into Black America.
Well, that was the CIA. It's always the CIA.
Yeah, I'm not sure
A lot of
if
it
he's
was,
aware,
yeah.
but he's very much. He basically says like the Reagan administration is not fighting the drug war hard enough. They're fighting a war of war.
Oh no, that's that Republican bullshit.
Yeah.
Sure.
So he's kind of a drug warrior, as are kind of like a lot of
Kind of
these
annoying.
Rainbow Coalition candidates. However, he does talk about the need to like crack down on banks that are allowing drug dealing and profiteering. So that is at least somewhat better than like.
It's so
mainstream.
weird how you see how like nobody even smokes crack anymore. I mean, like they really like. I'm sure a few people do, but like it was big back in the '80s.
I mean, there's maybe a few people in the Trump administration who are.
I mean, some crackheads for sure. But I want to get back to the war on poverty because we haven't heard that. I haven't heard the war on poverty in I don't know. When's the last time a candidate said that?
It may be this. Yeah, because Clinton's not saying it.
Yeah.
He's trying to bring it back. He's basically like Reaganism is bad, which I think we all probably agree with. I'm going to undo it. I'm going to cut the military spending, which we'll talk about, and I'm going to bring back the stuff that helps people.
Makes sense.
I did want to say a little more. The space thing is basically Reagan thought if we had like lasers in space, they could intercept nuclear missiles,
Right.
and then we could win the Cold War.
Star Wars.
Yeah, and it's called Star Wars. Yeah, and it basically mutually assured destruction. Thank you. Would not be a problem anymore. And they thought that, and they spent a lot of money on that, and then the Soviet Union collapsed due to other things.
Oh yeah, and you know what? And the Soviet Union is back. And you know what? What would Reagan think now if like basically the Soviet Union is winning by using his platform? You know what I mean? If you really think about it.
Yeah.
Like Trump is like very like in the vein of Reagan, but he's obviously a Russian agent. Yeah.
Well, I disagree, but
You don't think he's a Russian agent?
I think that's been pretty discredited at this point.
It's
but.
not. He has to be. Are you crazy? Wait, that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
Let's go.
I do sort of think like Putin is Russian Reagan, yeah. But
Yeah,
Russia's
this-
kind of back to what it was because Russia always had a conservative czar, and they just kind of stopped having one for a little bit.
Yeah, that's true.
But that he in this. Sorry, I don't know.
Is it me? Oh.
No, I think it's my mic or something. But yeah, he talks about cutting the military budget without cutting defense. We never intimidated the Russians with cost overruns. And then, this brings us to the next campaign, 1988, where, this is a real question. Could he have won that nomination? And I think there's a real possibility there. Before he enters the race, the vibe, instead of run, Jesse, run, it's win, Jesse, win. So they're
Interesting.
yeah, they're taking this seriously. The movement, which is what they view, the forces coalescing behind this campaign, are really very serious about this. And that's another thing that's just has kind of vanished in history and pop culture, that there was this moment similar to Bernie a few years ago. But some of the policies he talks about is cutting defense. He does sort of like Trump too. Says NATO has to chip in more, and that it's time to raise taxes on rich people because they have the cushion. And he does give a speech to the Jefferson-Jackson dinner in Iowa, and his intro says, "He's a man who makes things happen. He's brought poetry and passion to politics, eloquence and energy to the democratic dialogue." And at this time, the early favorite is Gary Hart, who did pretty well in 1984 and is running again, and he drops out and then comes back. And the dropout really helps Jesse Jackson because now he's, they haven't kind of settled on Dukakis yet, so he's,
Dukakis.
Yeah, have you heard of Gary Hart, Meka?
I feel like I've heard that name, but I don't know why.
He said something like, "Follow me around if you want. There's nothing interesting happening." And then immediately they catch him with a woman because he's cheating on his wife constantly.
Oh, that's hilarious.
and yeah, he drops out. And then, yeah, Dukakis is pretty boring.
Isn't that crazy how you used to have to drop out of a race if you were like cheating on someone?
Yeah, I mean this is kind of the first iteration of that. But
That's
it becomes
crazy.
a big.
No one even cares anymore.
But by the time Jesse announces, polling shows that he's leading in 9 of the 12 southern states that are going to hold primaries or caucuses in March. So later than the other states, later than some whiter states as well. But he's leading the field, 27%, because it's a lot of guys in this at the same time, and he's kind of winning a plurality.
Yeah, he isn't set up that well in that he's not that good in Iowa and New Hampshire, the two of the whitest states, and then he's not also that good on Super Tuesday. But after that, he has a lot better of a shot.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's kind of similar to Trump in 2016, how everybody thought this is an aberration, but he's winning and he's ahead in the polls just because he's generating attention. And unlike Trump, the establishment was able to stop Jackson, even after he's the quote-unquote statistical frontrunner.
Yeah, the media doesn't like to say he's the favorite, so they're like, he's just statistically he's ahead, but of course he's not going to. The media treats him as that he can't win because he's black.
Yeah.
Well, he couldn't technically back in the 80s. Yeah.
Or was it a self-fulfilling prophecy? That's the other.
I don't know. I don't know. White people are racist anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to that definitely. But so in these debates, he is running like an insurgent campaign, but he's fairly conciliatory to the other candidates. He says his main opponent is Bush, and he doesn't want to bring negative energy.
Bush Sr.
Yeah, H.W. Bush, who's the vice president now. And there's even a debate where it says with Dukakis, among us there are distinctions but not differences.
That's true. That's what, because Bush Sr. is kind of like, he's like Biden. They have the same,
Between Dukakis and Jackson.
Oh, I mean, like, I'm just thinking about Bush Sr., like how, if we think about his platform, it's very modern day Democratic Party as opposed to Republican Party.
Yeah, I mean, in 1980, when he ran against Reagan, he was, a lot of stuff that would be seen as like mainstream liberal Democratic.
Yeah, and the Bushes aren't endorsing Trump. So the senior Bush isn't alive anymore, but they never endorsed Trump.
Yeah.
And it's even kind of thought that they might have supported Biden.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were never that right wing. But anyway, well, the senior one, anyway.
But he doesn't want to criticize other Democrats, which, of course, I want that. I want him to go for the jugular and be negative and call these guys like corrupt and sellouts. But maybe that's not wise electorally. Even though, when it's moderates who are running against each other, usually it gets really feisty. But usually the progressive candidate is often not afforded that same leeway or is just, too scared to rock the boat.
There is something nice. Dukakis is into universal health care. He's considering doing it for Massachusetts. And then Jesse's running on that also. So there are a lot more left on health care than the candidates are right now.
Yeah. But he's talking about a 5-year military spending freeze, which would mean the military budget would not increase for 5 years.
That would have been smart.
Yeah. And it would have helped balance the budget too, since he wants to spend more on social programs. And Dukakis points out that he says either way, defense spending is not going to rise because the Cold War is winding down at this point. There's Gorbachev. But there's a farm debate in Iowa, and he's pretty good at talking about rural issues. Like my great uncle was in Iowa, was not a farmer, but lived in Iowa, and you had a lot of people supporting Jesse Jackson who were white. People were farmers. Their farms were getting shut down and foreclosed. He went and negotiated with banks and got people good deals. So he had a real constituency
That's
there.
really cool. It's like real community building.
Yeah, definitely.
You also, he's not from a big city. He's from Greenville, South Carolina.
Right.
I thought when we read about it, I thought he was from New York like Al Sharpton, but no, he's not. Yeah. He's a lot more
Jesse Jackson.
national.
New York. Yeah.
Yeah. Something I found alarming from one of these debates, he's asked, would you break up the ghetto? What
does that even mean?
I don't know. Yeah, it's, I guess,
I'm confused.
just like, there was kind of like this ideology. I think of that, there's the Ice-T song, Escape from the Killing Fields. It's kind of like to get out, go somewhere else, escape, go to the suburbs, instead of trying to make...
what's it called? There's this like social science theory. Black people isolate their poor, white people integrate their poor. It's like this whole weird thing. That's the difference between white people and black people.
Yeah.
We get a little money, we isolate the poor. White people integrate their poor into their neighborhoods.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's kind of in tune with this question. But Jesse answers, he says, you wouldn't break up large concentrations of poor white people. Poverty is from deprivation. Let's end deprivation with jobs and education. He wants to double the federal education budget. And he says it costs more per year to send a young person to jail than to educate.
True, still does.
Yep. And he even says full employment's not enough. In slavery, everyone has a job, but they have no security, no benefits, and is pointing out that we have a pay gap. Half of poor kids live in a household with no man, so you have to raise women's wages and give them comparable work.
Oh, look at that. Women's wages being raised. I like that.
They're making 65 cents on the dollar at this point, and it's not as if, he says, a loaf of bread is not cheaper if you're a woman.
That's progressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sokol is building a big coalition, especially in '88.
So some of the early states, Dick Gephardt wins Iowa on kind of an anti-free trade message. Dukakis wins New Hampshire, New England state, and Jesse's. The media at this point is kind of like, okay, it's over for him. But then he starts winning. And one of his first wins is in Vermont, even though it's a very white state, but he has the support of a mayor at the time, Bernie Sanders.
Damn, how long has Bernie Sanders been alive?
Over 80 years, like 82 or 3 years, long time.
I think he's slightly younger than Jesse.
Oh, is he? Oh, yeah, Jesse's old too now. Is he gay? Is Jesse still alive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He has Parkinson's, so he's not doing as much public
Okay,
speaking.
got
Yeah.
it. That's what, yeah.
But Bernie is an independent, and so he does not support him in 1984 because he doesn't want to get involved in the Democratic primary.
Yeah.
Also, the Democratic Socialists of America does not support him in '84 because they think Reagan is like a temporary aberration. We just have to get him out of office as soon as possible.
Yeah, right.
So let's just get behind Mondale. And they miss that there's this movement forming around the Jackson campaigns. And so in 88, they do endorse him. Bernie endorses him, even though he's an independent, and he says it is awkward to go into this Democratic caucus and say, I support Jesse Jackson. A woman in Burlington actually slaps Bernie Sanders in the face.
Oh, shit.
For speaking in support of Jesse Jackson. And his response is like, that was not very nice.
Because he's black?
Yeah, that's racist for sure. Yeah, she might not like Jews either. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was like, that one is racist.
Yeah.
I was like, that's stupid. Anyway, Vermont is a weird place. I've never been there.
Burlington is close to Canada, too. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Anyway. The Democratic Party's always wrong. Anyway. It's like, it's never right.
Yeah. But he also wins Alabama. So he's winning North and South. And then Super Tuesday, he starts to gain a little bit. But it is difficult for Super Tuesday because he's doesn't have a lot of money, and he's kind of spread thin. And Super Tuesdays like all these states at once, and Dukakis just has a larger operation, so he's able to really rack up a lot of delegates on Super Tuesday. But as people have looked at the primary schedule and seen, there's some states later on that Jackson could have a shot to win. And it starts happening, even though the media is just, this isn't serious, is like 84. He surprises some people. In South Carolina, he moves into first place. He gets 22 delegates. Dukakis gets 0 in South Carolina.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes you win a state and disproportionately only get a little bit extra, but this he gets a nice bump.
Right. And I think South Carolina also does, at this point, maybe has some anti-Greek sentiment because
Greek?
Yeah, Zach Galifianakis, he's from South Carolina, and his uncle was a Democratic congressman with the name Galifianakis, and one of Lee Atwater's first casualties was the uncle of Zach Galifianakis, and he kind of like he kind of otherized him. It's like, what's this guy with this weird last name doing representing
Galifianakis?
Yeah. So I don't know if that has anything to do with Dukakis' struggles in
That's weird
in South
now.
Carolina.
Greeks are like white now, aren't they?
Yeah.
After that movie, My Big Fat Greek.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but Dukakis is quite Greek. Yeah. His parents are Greek immigrants.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Jackson does lose Illinois to Paul Simon, who's not of Simon and Garfunkel. Maybe we'll do an episode on him.
He wore a bow tie, and he just seems like an old, like Midwestern guy with a bow tie.
Yeah, he's a nerd, and he stays in the race. He runs kind of an Illinois-centric campaign, it seems. And some have speculated maybe because he was somewhat progressive, and some have speculated that he was kind of like pushed to stay in to kind of siphon votes away from Jackson.
That makes sense.
Yeah. What do you think, Fred?
It is definitely annoying for Jesse that he's only running in the Midwest. Because he finishes second in Iowa, first in Illinois, and that's pretty much all he does.
Yeah.
And it is possible the elites pushed him to stay. And one book said that he had dropped out and got back in, but I couldn't find evidence of that.
Yeah, a lot of these, Gary Hart, it's like kind of dormant for a while. I think like technically maybe it's legally still a campaign, and he has like money he can access.
So Hart comes back and starts doing the debates, and he's just like doesn't have it anymore. He loses his fastball.
Yeah.
So Hart is still running it. He came back and he's running at this point, but he gets like no delegates.
Yeah. In 1984 he's come in second, so he should have been he was thought to be the front runner. There's the book I Am Somebody, says that Paul Simon was pushed to re-enter. But then comes the Michigan caucus, which is good for Jackson because, like Bernie, he did well with caucuses in 2016 because you have the more committed people who show up.
Yeah.
He shocks everybody and wins Michigan. The votes are being tabulated, and the media is congratulating Dukakis for winning Michigan. Even Dick Gephardt is like, good job, Michael, you're the guy. And then they are completely shocked when Jesse Jackson wins with a 2-1 margin. And there's a lot of delegates in Michigan. It's a populous state. So he is now in a dead heat with Dukakis. It's a really interesting campaign. This moment in time is really fascinating. How did he do this?
He was well organized, and they realized you can register at the caucus. So they weren't at the caucus trying to convince caucus goers. They were out there registering people until they were out there telling people come to the caucus, register, and vote for Jesse. And they got people out. Also, Dukakis kind of thought he was already going to wrap up the nomination, so he was a little bit passive, and Jesse shocked him.
Yeah,
that's huge. I never knew that Jesse won Michigan. Interesting.
Yeah. It does also help, like the UAW endorses Dukakis, but he's not really that pro. He's not really that pro worker or whatever. Instead of endorsing Gephardt, and there's just like a lot of white guys who all seem the same, and then Jesse seems like the one guy on the left who cares.
Got it. That makes sense.
And this came out in We Got People. The caucus sites in Michigan, they had like very little Jackson campaign presence because all the volunteers and staffers they had were out in the apartment complexes and the neighborhoods getting people to show up at the caucus sites. And the other campaigns had their people at the caucus locations trying to do politics at the last minute. Jackson's folks had already like inoculated people and gotten them to come vote and caucus for him. He wins black neighborhoods 15-1. Even though there's at least one book said Dukakis was fairly popular among black voters. I'm not sure how true that is.
I don't even know who that is, but it doesn't sound like he would be.
He's going to lose to George Bush.
Yeah, he loses to Bush.
That makes sense.
And he like wins the majority of the black vote, but the turnout is pretty low.
Nobody cared about that white man.
And Bush somehow runs a campaign where he talks about Dukakis letting a black guy have a weekend pass and murdering somebody. So he's ended up running a campaign that's raced against black people against this Greek guy, and ends up winning pretty big.
Yeah.
And he won. No, joking.
But before the Michigan caucus, the Washington Post asks, what does Jesse want, i.e. that he's not actually running to become president, he's just doing some kind of grift or wants to set himself up.
They made it seem like he was like an opposition candidate for something.
Yeah.
But what would he be? What would he be doing? Helping the Republicans? Like
maybe just raising his profile.
I can see that.
Yeah.
But I think he had a shot. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. But he replies, what does Dukakis want? He should be the guy. He also wins the Delaware caucus. He gets 86.6 delegates. Dukakis only gets 51.5. And with this, you have to wonder how much of a role the media plays because he's treated like he can't win, essentially, is what it comes down to. And what all the coverage... All right. So, the media, they scrutinize him a lot. There's like a Meet the Press interview we watched. What kind of role do you think they play, Fred?
Yeah, Meet the Press, they're just like cross-examining him. They open it with like the conventional wisdom is he can't win the nomination because of his race. And also he's too liberal. I added that emphasis, but it's something like that. Yeah. And they ask him how he's going to attack Bush, and he says, he's not fighting the drug war, and they have the sleaze factor. A lot of Republicans are getting arrested for Iran-Contra. Which was a big scandal back then, where the Reagan government broke the law in foreign policy. Then they have this woman, Elizabeth Drew. She's like a liberal reporter in Palace, but like she's there representing the establishment. She's cross-examining him, when she's like interrupting him to ask the next question. And she's like, well, you got some hostages home in Syria. Why can't you get the Iranian hostages home? Then she asked the PLO about the PLO, which is a criticism of Jackson. And of course, then she does the standard centrist line of how will you pay for things in your budget, and she tries to like get him on that stuff. There's a commercial. I watched it on YouTube. There's a commercial on there. Larry Bird's shooting hoops. He's in his prime in 88, whatever. He's still in his prime. And then it's a commercial for why Raytheon is good. So that was the 80s. You have Raytheon advertising. And then this is my favorite part of the interview. The final question, this is from the host. They say, you have proposed the gay couple should receive some of the same benefits as married couples. Isn't that the type of thing that has driven people away from the Democratic Party in recent years?
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, they're just like, this country's homophobic. Why are you not homophobic, Jesse? You're trying to lose. You obviously don't like gay people. And yeah, what he's proposing is definitely civil unions. He's not proposing calling it marriage, which I guess that was pretty far left at that point.
Yeah, I don't think we do the whole gay marriage thing until Obama.
Yeah.
And that was Biden who said it first, I feel.
Right. Yeah, and the party really does not want Jackson to be the nominee. There's some talk of getting Mario Cuomo to come in and swoop in at the final hour.
Cuomo.
Yeah.
It was like New York royalty. Anyway, go.
Yeah, he might have been governor I'm not sure when you were born, but yeah, he was governor when I was born.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a anonymous superdelegate who's interviewed, and he says, they say, gotta support Dukakis because the station is about to be blown up by terrorists, and we're the only ones who can defuse the bomb. And this is, I think, the most fascinating part of his time in the 80s is this like couple week period where it looks like he's going to get the nomination, and there's just this freak out. And it's similar to Bernie in 2020. How do they come together? How do they stop him? Do they need to, do some extra maneuvers? And they are able to stop him politically. But after Michigan, it comes down to Dukakis and Jackson in Wisconsin, and he has a lot of momentum going into Wisconsin. There's a lot of workers there who are like pissed off about Reaganomics, and they say, "Fuck yeah, we'll vote for him." But it was, unlike Michigan, it was an open primary, there's kind of the Bradley effect, I think. A lot of people go into the polls and maybe feel uncomfortable. The racism kicks in, or they, think about the general election and they're like, all right, this has gone on long enough. We have to coalesce behind somebody who can actually beat a Republican.
Yeah, they did. One of the books, What It Takes, that's a famous book about this primary. It's insanely long and just about the primary. And he does say Dukakis was a little bit better organized in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And he had been a favorite, and then Jesse doesn't get a bump.
Right. And because Jackson is sort of a victim of his own success because they aren't necessarily that prepared for running in all these different states. And it's not like today where you can raise money on the internet if you put out like a progressive message. You have to send out mailers, and it's like there's not that many people who like identify as socialist, let alone progressive even. So, or progressive, let alone socialist. So going into New York, this is kind of the last chance Jackson has to keep Dukakis from getting that delegate majority. And Al Gore is kind of a hanger-on at this point. He's technically still in the race.
Al Gore?
Yeah. He ran, yeah, he was a senator from Tennessee and ran in 88.
So yeah, in 88, so his dad was a senator, and then he wants to run before his dad dies. He's like in his 30s, and he's just like a young pitcher, and he's like kind of an asshole.
Oh, okay, got it. And this is before he created the internet.
This may have been during that.
Okay, got it.
He should have dropped that. If he was like, well, the internet's going to exist, and be like, you're crazy, Gore. But yeah, he is running more conservative. He is to the right of Dukakis, who's kind of running more in the middle.
Got it.
Dukakis is basically who just wants to balance the books. He's very much running to be the accountant, and that does not do well in the general.
That's boring.
Yeah, he is boring. Yeah, he makes George H.W. Bush look charismatic.
But he gets the support of the mayor of New York, Ed Koch. And
that's for he endorses Gore.
Yeah, Gore does. Yeah, you said he's kind of like Al Gore. You had a phrase for this. Running in New York.
They say Al Gore is running to be Jew for a week. I think they say that in one of the books. And Koch is basically like, he's the attack dog for Gore and maybe for the establishment. He says Jews or supporters of Israel will be crazy to vote for Jackson.
Yeah.
But Jackson needs to run up the score in New York City, and they're using the Jewish angle to hurt him. And people still remember Himey Town, even though it was 4 years earlier.
That's crazy.
Right.
I told you it's a common tactic with the Jewish against, it's a thing. But whatever.
Oh, no, it's very much in this campaign. Yeah, because if he had won New York, he would have been in a lot better shape. Because then later on, people are like, well, he's already lost, so I'm not going to vote for him.
Right.
That makes sense.
Ed Koch later does say, he says, if racial or religious friction resulted from my comments, I apologize.
Ed Koch, where's he? He's from New York.
Yeah.
I remember he was mayor. What nationality is he?
I think he's Jewish.
Yeah, he's Jewish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So he eventually hosted People's Court. I think also he might have been secretly gay and he covered up stuff about AIDS.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
that, wait, where'd you get that from?
It was in some doc I've seen
It's
about
pretty well-
closeted
yeah.
politicians.
He refuses to like say one way or the other if he's
Oh,
gay
wow.
or not. But it's pretty.
Interesting.
it was really bad because AIDS
You're
is-
saying it's pretty well known?
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
like-
is it?
among huge nerds, yeah. Among people
Okay,
who do
okay.
podcasts about presidential losers, yeah, the Ed Koch gay rumors are rampant.
Hey, go on.
But going into the New York primary, they asked the candidates straight up in one of the debates, can a black guy win? And they say, yeah, like Al Gore and Dukakis are like, sure, of course, yeah. Maybe he can even be the vice president. Yeah, totally.
that's funny.
But they're kind of hinting at like, no, they do not do this.
Definitely not, yeah.
And then Jesse says, their foreparents came to America on immigrant ships. My foreparents came to America on slave ships.
True.
But whatever the original ships, we're in the same boat tonight, and I want to be the captain of the ship.
And the slave ships were here first. Just FYI.
Yeah, definitely
yeah,
here
absolutely.
before Dukakis's parents.
Yeah, and mine.
Yeah. And he gives sort of a modified version of this later at the convention. But he asks if Gore sees a correlation to collapsing bridges and the military budget, which is going way up. And Gore, doesn't really
Wait, the
see
bridges
that.
were collapsing back then, too?
Oh, yeah. It's,
Ridiculous.
These are a lot of the same issues today, yeah.
It's like nothing has changed in like 40 years.
yeah.
Right.
Around this time, they could see that America was beginning to decline, and now
Got
we're in
it.
full decline.
And now we're like, damn it.
yeah. At least Jesse is sort of running to try to reverse the decline, but most people are just trying to do little things.
Yeah.
Right. He wins. Dukakis wins 51-31 to 10. So Jackson loses by 20 points, but he's still 31 points. He's doing a lot better than Gore, who's pulling out all the stops, and the Dukakis is seen as kind of a lock on the nomination. I also should mention he has the support in New York of Olympia Dukakis, who is his
Wait,
cousin.
why does that sound familiar? What did she do?
Broadway
She's an
star?
actor. yeah.
Ah, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
she campaigns for her cousin, but as Jesse points out, the votes themselves are looking at the actual votes. 30% are Dukakis, 29% is Jackson. So this is still a race, and if they're going to be the Democratic Party, they should reflect the lower
That's
voters.
well, it's not New York City, it's New York State. But I was thinking like there's a huge at that time there were like way more black people in New York City. He should have like been able to get more votes from Dukakis, but whatever.
Yeah, well, I think it's. I assume it was this way back then. New York's pretty strict about registering. If you want to vote in a
it's
primary.
yeah, you can't. I can't. I'm not registered to a party, so I can't vote in primaries.
If you want, by next week, the deadline is February 13th.
Oh, to register to a party?
Yeah, if you want to vote against
Democrat.
Adams and Cuomo in the primary, yeah.
Yeah.
And for the Jesse Jackson of this mayoral race, Zoran Mandavi.
I can't register to a party. I refuse, which is stupid. But
I was the same way for a long time. And then,
Oh, yeah, I hate both
all
parties. I
right,
just want more.
New
I just
York.
like voting.
that's true too.
New York should change the rule. But,
I mean, it's a dumb rule, but yeah.
but at the conclusion of the Democratic primary season, Jackson's gotten 6.9 million votes. He's won 11 contests, 7 primaries, Alabama, D.C., Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Puerto Rico, Virginia, 4 caucuses, Delaware, Michigan, South Carolina, Vermont. And the day after the final primaries, Jackson and Dukakis sit down and they discuss some of Jackson's platform, which includes what we're just talking about, voter registration, universal same-day on-site voter registration, changing the rules for the winner-take-all delegate allocation as well.
Oh, okay. We were still talking about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so the delegate became proportional in the Democratic primaries. It's still not in the Republican primaries. And Obama beats Hillary because of that rule.
Yes,
So in that way, he definitely helped Obama and also registering a lot more black voters.
Got it.
Yeah. And similar to Obama, Jackson wins the 45 and under vote and wins even bigger numbers with people who are age 18 to 24.
Got it. The progressives.
Yeah. So and I assume that's
Are those our parents? Right. Yeah.
Mine were older than that.
Oh, okay. That might have been my parents.
But he doesn't win against Dukakis. It's really kind of Wisconsin, then New York is the 1-2 punch. But he exceeds everybody's expectations. And R.W. Apple from the New York Times calls 1988 the year of Jackson. So going into the convention, he's rumored as a VP pick for Dukakis.
Yeah, and surely Dukakis is going to pick someone similar to Jesse Jackson if he doesn't pick Jackson.
You would think.
Yeah, so he picks this guy Lloyd Bentsen, who's the whitest guy from Texas and super conservative.
Yeah.
Oh, why would he do that?
He's trying to win. He has this idea that you can win Massachusetts and Texas at the same time, and that'll be an unbeatable axis. He says the Austin to Boston axis, and he thinks that's going to defeat the Republicans.
JFK and LBJ did that,
right?
for sure.
Yeah, and that was an early memory for him. So he's like, we got to do that same thing. And the country's changed. Bentsen is depressing turnout among people who would vote for him, Dukakis otherwise. But he does consider Jackson, and he has him up to Boston, and they hang out, and everybody can kind of tell though that it's like a formality, like he's not actually.
Got it. He should have had a cabinet position or something.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, Dukakis does lose, but one funny detail, and I related to this. The Dukakis for this dinner with Jackson, where he's going to like interview him for the job that he's not actually considering him for. He has a bunch of like dairy-based foods, and Jesse Jackson is lactose intolerant, so he can't eat any of that stuff. Which I am, as a lactose intolerant American, I identified with that story. Bentsen is the VP pick and does have a good debate moment, but other than that, just doesn't really make a big impact on the race. But the Democratic platform, though, is impacted by Jesse Jackson. Mm-hmm. It includes sanctions for South Africa.
Yeah.
The on-site voter registration rule, DC statehood.
We were still talking about that?
Yeah.
Jesse gets very involved with that. Yeah, in the 90s, he's the DC. He's like a fake senator who's there to like lobby for.
Right.
Oh, that's crazy.
Shadow senator, yeah. And comprehensive child care legislation.
Nice.
And he gives a primetime speech. He's got all 5 kids there, and they play him a tribute video.
He had 5 kids?
Yeah, I think he had more than 5 kids.
I think he may only have 5.
Really?
I think they had.
But then the one who came about later. Right?
Oh, is there a love child?
There's a love child, yeah.
He does have a son, right? Like a famous one?
He's got
Jesse Jackson Jr., who becomes a congressman who has bipolar disorder and has to step down and gets in trouble for corruption.
Yeah, and his other son is now a senator. So he has 2. He has 2 congressman sons. He has a daughter who's in the media. We're gonna go through it a little more in the Patreon half.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
But yeah, he comes out on the stage with his wife. This is in Atlanta, so historically significant. And he brings out Rosa Parks, and they have their
Rosa Parks. She was alive.
Yeah, she was still around for a while. Yeah,
She made it to the 2000s for sure.
yeah.
Wow.
And they're like clasping hands, and they talk about people dying outside the hospital while there's a bed sitting empty, waiting for a person with insurance to get sick. It talks a little bit about his background. They see me running for the White House. They don't see the house I'm running from. And he ends with a refrain to keep hope alive.
Keep hope alive.
Yeah. And he says, I love you very much. And then, this is a pretty stark contrast with Michael Dukakis.
Yeah, it was just a fiscal conservative. Yeah, I would say there's no way for us to do the speech justice. You should, if you enjoy this episode, definitely go watch that speech.
Yeah.
It's peak Jesse. It's amazing. And we're going to contrast it because, he makes another speech later on that's not as good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and 48% of all TVs were watching if you added up all the channels.
Man, that's
So it was like a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
It was his concession speech?
It's at the convention.
At the convention.
Oh, at the Democratic convention.
Yeah,
Got it.
So he's like sort of endorsing Dukakis, but he's kind of just doing his thing, and it's amazing.
Oh, okay, basically just to be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that brings us to post-presidential campaign, Jesse Jackson. According to Bill Fletcher Jr., who's an organizer and scholar and was involved in the Rainbow Coalition, after the 1988 race, there was kind of an existential crisis within the Rainbow Coalition. That was like, how are we going to, continue? What's this organization going to be like? And Jackson has a meeting in 1989 and basically says, in Fletcher's words, that they're going to turn it. He wants to turn it into a personalist vehicle for Jesse Jackson and his career. And what the other people wanted was a membership-based sort of large-scale democratic organization that was going to push for progressive issues.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it doesn't. That sadly does not happen. But his biographer is really defensive of Jackson, the one we read, I Am Somebody. But I think that is a fair criticism. He has a lot of tensions with Bill Clinton. There's the Sister Soldier speech in 1992.
Sister Soldier, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember this? Were you around at the time?
No, not really.
Okay.
I mean,
We remember hearing
I
about
was a child.
Even I was too young. Yeah.
I mean, I don't remember, but Sister Soldier is important in terms of blackness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The Clinton relationship is just crazy. Yeah. But yeah, Sister Soldiers when Clinton kind of shows him up.
Yeah. Right. He sort of admonishes his organization for having this speaker on the previous day, and it's just a very obvious, at a time when people kind of thought Clinton was going to try and appeal to the Jackson wing of the Democratic Party, which Jesse Jackson, in fairness to him, thought he had enshrined is the Jackson wing of the Democratic Party, people who cared.
Oh, he thought that was like a thing?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it kind of was for a moment there, but Clinton just
Clinton
destroyed it.
Demolished that.
Yeah, Clinton gets them to vote for him, but he does the opposite policies.
Yeah.
Because he's gonna cut welfare. He's gonna keep the defense up. He's gonna do NAFTA. He's doing So it's they end up they almost end up getting kind of tricked.
The neoliberalism.
Yeah, it's really sad because it's a coalition for some really good stuff and it doesn't get done. And Sister Soldier, the big thing was that she had said, if black people kill black people every day, why not have a week and kill white people? And then she speaks and Clinton speaks the next day at the Rainbow Push and just uses it to really declare that I'm not like Jesse Jackson. I'm down with racism.
right.
I get that. He's a Southern white boy. He doesn't have Sister Soldier. What does Sister Soldier have to do with Jesse Jackson, though?
So she's speaking at the Rainbow Push call.
Oh, got it. But she's an activist. It makes sense.
Yeah. So she had said she was scheduled to speak, and then she said the line, and it was going viral in conservative media for whatever conservative media was in 1992. And Jesse's like, we can't disinvite her. That wouldn't be right. So they have her, and then Clinton almost doesn't come, but he's like, he actually goes, and he's like, he'll use it as a way to show I'm not like the left wing of the party. And this is centrists love this. They call it a Sister Soldier moment, and they love when politicians do this.
No, this is crazy because Clinton's if I was around back then, I'd be like, he's a fucking hack.
Absolutely.
Because I'm sure that quote from Sister Soldier was very pro-black, but I'm sure it was taken out of context.
Yeah, she's a fair, not someone you needed to bring up in a speech to this audience, and Clinton very clearly was signaling to white moderates.
To whiteness, yeah. Which is why did they call him the first black president then? He was a...
I did want to say, after doing this research, it made me angry that they called him that. Because Jesse was the first black presidential candidate to do pretty well. And then Clinton was not running like that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But 1992, there is some talk about Jackson running a third time, and maybe he should have, because... There's Tom Harkin. There's a couple kind of progressive candidates, but it's a much more moderate field without him. And during the Clinton years, Rainbow Push as an organization kind of becomes more focused on hiring practices, which is important, and not discriminating.
Yeah.
But it's not what they were doing in the 80s and talking about and actually, bringing...
Anti-poverty. And that type of stuff.
Yeah, they're even moving towards Wall Street hiring, which is not the working class.
Right.
And he works with Trump on that. Trump gives him a conference space.
Oh, really? That's the beginning of what, DEI? As everyone
sort of, yeah. It's kind
everyone's so talking about.
And you still see Al Sharpton kind of focused on DEI, he was doing a shop in a Costco because they kept the DEI, but they're not good with union stuff.
Yeah.
And that was happening recently.
Right. But I did find this piece interesting about his relationship with Clinton. There's a lot of tension in his first term, and because he's kind of a punching bag for Clinton to be like, I'm not like him, and even to the point where going into 1996, Clinton is straight up considering doing away with affirmative action because he's gutted welfare based on racist narratives. He's balanced the budget, done all these Republican things.
And the crime bill, too. I forgot to mention
the crime bill, which Jackson is opposed to.
He's one of the black leaders who's opposed to it. Yeah. There's a lot of...
which did take some courage, so he gets credit for that because it's... Yeah,
I think there's black congressmen or the black caucus that may have voted for it. Maybe even Bernie voted for it, but Jackson did not.
A lot of people voted for the crime bill. Because there was all this media attention on like gangs in the inner city.
And it also did contain like the assault weapons ban and violence against women's act. So it's hard to vote against it.
Which is very, the violence against women's act, classic.
Yeah, that one we still have. The assault one we got rid of. Hope knock on wood it'll stay, but we still have that.
Yeah, but I found this really. Clinton just wanted to get rid of affirmative action, and this was all kind of behind the scenes. And Jackson got wind of it and said, "If you do that, I'm gonna primary you in 1996." And I kind of wish that would have happened.
Oh man,
that would have been cool because it would have revealed Clinton to be like not the first black president that people say.
Yeah,
and he would have. That was like before Monica. That was like around Monica Lewinsky.
Later, a little before. It was like while it was technically happening, but it didn't break until a couple years later.
It could have been like it could have really damaged Clinton second term.
Yeah, that would have been something. Really would have been interesting to watch, and hopefully he would have kept the sort of progressive policies he had ran on previously.
It might have stopped Clinton from doing welfare reform because he does welfare reform after he gets nominated for the second time.
Right.
And it might have pushed Clinton left and he wasn't able to do that because he forces that in, even though he's still likely to be dull without it.
Yeah.
And that hurt a lot of people, that bill.
Yeah, welfare reform was dumb. It was like welfare to work bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Obviously a lot more on Jesse Jackson over the years. I will say I met him in...
met Jesse?
Yeah, it was 2021, I think it was. I was living in D.C., across the street from Ben's Chili Bowl, and I just happened to be walking past, and I saw him going in with all these people, and I went in and shook his hand, and I told him my great-uncle caucused for you, and then I walked out, and then they were like, oh, he wants to talk to you. And I got really starstruck. I sat down with him, and he was like,
"This is a weird story." Go on.
Yeah. He wanted to know what I did for a living, and for like 30 seconds, I just couldn't answer the question because I was like so awestruck that I was talking to Jesse Jackson. Eventually, ironically, I said, "I interview people." Which is clearly not communicating with people. That's something
so
that was good at
random. That's really random. You and Jesse.
He comes off so charismatic. Yeah.
I didn't even know white people knew who Jesse Jackson was.
Really?
I mean, not really. If you ask a normal white guy on the street, they're gonna be like, "Who?" Yeah, like not an old one, but like a you people age. I mean, I guess you guys. Anyway.
Yeah. But we usually conclude with like.
Oh, can I just do the?
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, I just want to. So yeah, he's great in '88. I do think his '92 convention speech represents Jesse, kind of showing that he's not like a maverick anymore. He's not really going on his own thing. He's kind of just absorbed into the Democratic Party by his '92 convention speech. He says corny lines like he's reading with his glasses on. He's reading these canned lines. He's like, "I put Hope, Arkansas on the map by saying keep hope alive." And then he's complimenting Gore, who had been so crappy to him. He's like, Gore is great because Dan Quayle can't spell potato. And then he credits Gore with introducing D.C. statehood, which maybe he technically did, but that's other activists. Yeah. And it's kind of when you see him speak, he can speak very passionately about things before '88, but after '88, his career, he's a little bit more just an establishment guy. He's not really fighting as hard.
What happened to him? Somebody gave him some money or something?
I did wonder that. We couldn't figure that out. And you did. And Andrews did mention him doing a little something in the '90s with Clinton. But yeah, he isn't the same after '88, and it's very disappointing because he was amazing in '84 through '88.
Yeah. We like to conclude with considering what would have happened if somehow he gotten elected. I think obviously the best shot at that was 1988. He beats Dukakis in the primary, and I think at a minimum we can say he would have done better against George H.W. Bush than Dukakis did. Maybe not. Maybe the racism would have just been so totalizing that it would have just made him do worse. But I think the turnout would have been a lot greater among black voters, poor voters, young people. So maybe he at least wins a few more states. But let's say he wins. What do you guys think would have happened?
I do want to add, I do think, he does a racist campaign against Dukakis anyway. It might have been hard to do against an actual black candidate.
That's true.
People might have been
Bush,
like, well, you can't do this racist thing. This guy's black. But like Dukakis is Greek, so like you can do it.
Right.
Because it's the Willie Horton campaign.
But it was the 80s, though. I don't know. So if Jesse would have won?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think we would have gotten the Bill Clinton, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so we wouldn't have gotten Bill Clinton, which maybe would have ushered in, I don't know, some sort of George W. Bush type figure earlier. Or maybe not, but you just don't get Bill Clinton. You just don't get him.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I do worry about both corruption and sex scandals.
Yeah.
But I love his policies. I love the way he speaks. I want to believe it would have been amazing.
What sex scandals? I think I remember he was cheating on his wife or something.
Yeah,
He's kind
admitted
of
to that,
allowed to cheat, or at least she tolerates it. He's kind of like a Kennedy in that way, where he doesn't have to be faithful to his wife. Maybe it hurts her, but we don't really know for sure. And he does have a sex scandal with a staffer. We're going to go through in the Patreon episode.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I can see that happening, and I can see him getting disassembled in other ways. And the Democratic Party again at that time is changing, and based on the way he reacted in the 90s, maybe he would have kind of moderated a bit. But I like to think he would have galvanized people, and that to me is the real counterfactual isn't if he won, but if he had kept the Rainbow Coalition intact, because that really represented something real. And if that had been sustained for over decades, you wouldn't have had the same problems that like Bernie Sanders had when he ran in 2016, when it was like at first overwhelmingly white support. So I think that's really the
That's
thing.
right. Yeah, that's why Bernie couldn't win the Democratic primary, because he did not do inroads with the black community. Yeah, I remember that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Meka, and where can people find you and your work?
You can find me on Instagram at Meka, Meka Social. And you can find me at www.mekamocomedy.com.
All right. Nice. And we are at Vanquished Pod on social media. I'm at Anders Lee here.
At Orange Freddy J.
And check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thevanquished for more info on Jesse Jackson and other losers. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Vanquished. If you want the full thing, because there is more, please go to patreon.com/thevanquished, where you can get the rest of this episode as well as our full episode catalog. You can support our work as well as annoy us in the comments.